All right, everyone, welcome in. Get ready because today we're going deep on large language models, or LLMs for short. You know, those AI systems that seem like they can practically do it all, right? Like Shakespeare, translate languages on the fly, answer your questions better than any search engine. Seriously, mind-blowing stuff.
It really is. I mean, these models are completely changing how we interact with information. You're right, we're not just hitting keywords in the search bar anymore. It's like we're having these in-depth conversations with AI
Yeah.
that can actually understand all the little nuances and context.
Exactly. And we've got a bunch of really cool sources we're going to be looking at today. One that I'm really excited about is 50 LLM interview questions. It's giving me this incredible peek behind the curtain of how these things actually work. And let me tell you, it is fascinating.
Oh yeah, that one's a gold mine, especially if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty technical details.
Okay, so first things first, how did these LLMs even understand language in the first place? It's not like they're born knowing English or Mandarin or anything, right?
Right, right. Well, think of it this way. You can't build a house without bricks, can you? For LLMs, those bricks are called tokens. It's all about breaking down language into these smaller, digestible chunks that the model can then process.
So, like, tokens can be whole words, parts of words, even just punctuation marks.
Exactly. And the really interesting part is how you decide to tokenize text that can have a massive impact on how well the LLM performs. Like imagine if you were teaching an LLM to understand code, you probably want to tokenize based on the actual programming syntax instead of individual letters or words, right?
Makes sense. So there's no one right way to do it. It's all about fitting the tokenization strategy to the specific task.
Totally. It's all about finding the best fit.
Got it. Okay, so now we've got the language all broken down into these tokens. But how does the LLM actually learn to make sense of them, to understand what they mean?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. One of the most common ways to train LLMs is using something called masked language modeling. Imagine you're reading a sentence, but some of the words are blanked out, and you have to guess what those missing words are based on the context. That's basically what the LLM is doing during its training.
So it's like a giant fill-in-the-blanks game, but for a super smart computer. And that helps it figure out how all the different words relate to each other.
You got it. And by doing this with massive amounts of text, the model learns to predict the most likely word based on the words that are around it. It's kind of like learning to speak a language by just immersing yourself in conversations and gradually picking up on all the patterns.
But knowing single words is only part of the story, right? We also need to teach these LLMs how sentences connect to each other, how they form coherent thoughts and narratives.
Absolutely. And that's where techniques like next sentence prediction come in. The model gets two sentences and has to figure out if they actually follow each other logically, like a game of does this make sense?
So it's learning the flow of conversation, like the unspoken rules of storytelling, all the subtle stuff that makes human language so incredibly complex.
Exactly. And these training techniques are constantly evolving too, always pushing the boundaries of what LMs can do.
It's really amazing when you think about it. It's like building a brain from the ground up. Something I always find fascinating is this idea of attention in LLMs. Can you explain how that works?
Okay, so think about how you read a sentence. You don't pay equal attention to every single word, do you? Your brain automatically focuses on the most important ones, the words that carry the core meaning of the sentence.
So it's kind of like selective hearing, but for language.
That's a great way to put it. And that's basically what these attention mechanisms do in LLMs. They allow the model to focus on the parts of the input that are most relevant, just like our brains.
And this attention thing, this is a big deal, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what lets these LLMs handle longer, more complex sentences without getting lost in all the details.
Exactly. Before we had these attention mechanisms, the older language models really struggled with something called long-range dependencies. Basically, if a pronoun and the noun it referred to were too far apart in the sentence, the model couldn't connect them. But attention solves that problem. It can make those connections no matter how far apart the words are.
So it's like giving the LLM a superpower, the power to keep track of all the important information, even in the middle of this huge jumble of words.
Exactly. It's really remarkable. And these attention mechanisms, they're one of the key breakthroughs that have led to LLMs being as good as they are today. They're what lets them understand and generate text that feels so incredibly human-like.
It's really impressive, but I'm also curious about the limits. I mean, they're powerful, but they're not magic, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. There are definitely still some big challenges that researchers are working on. One of them is computational resources. Just Training and running these massive LLMs takes a crazy amount of computing power, and that could be super expensive, not to mention energy intensive.
So it's like having this amazing, super powerful car, but it guzzles gas like crazy. Not exactly practical for everyday use.
I like that analogy. And that's why researchers are looking into things like model distillation. You basically take a big, complex model and create a smaller, more efficient version that still has most of the original knowledge.
So it's like creating a student model that learns from the teacher model, almost as smart, but way more energy efficient.
Perfect way to put it. And there are lots of different approaches to distillation. Like you can have the student model try to match the teacher's output, or you can just focus on distilling specific knowledge, like for a particular task.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, imagine being able to run these powerful LLMs on our phones and laptops without them melting or running out of battery in 5 minutes.
That's the dream. And it's not just about efficiency either. Smaller models are also easier to deploy and update, which could really help LLMs spread into different industries even faster.
Makes sense. But what about handling those words that the LLM has never seen before? How do they deal with the fact that language is always changing and evolving?
That's a great question. And LLMs have actually gotten pretty good at handling those out-of-vocabulary words thanks to some really clever tokenization strategies. Remember how we talked about breaking down words into smaller units?
Right, those subword units, like they can use them to figure out unfamiliar words by recognizing familiar parts.
Exactly. It's kind of like figuring out a new word based on its root or its prefix. Like, let's say the model encounters the word biodegradable. Even if it's never seen that exact word before, it can break it down into bio, degrad, and able, which are much more likely to be familiar from its training data.
So it's like a linguistic detective piecing together the meaning based on clues it already knows.
I love that. And that ability to handle new words is really essential for LLMs to keep up with how fast language is changing, especially in areas like science and tech, where there are always new terms popping up.
Speaking of evolution, we touched on multilingual capabilities earlier. It feels like LLMs are becoming increasingly fluent in multiple languages. How is that happening?
Well, one of the big advances is that we're now using these massive multilingual data sets for training. Like models like GPT-4, they've been trained on tons of text from all sorts of different languages.
So it's like putting the LLM through an intensive global language exchange program.
Yeah, it's a fun way to think about it. And this kind of training allows the LLM to not just learn the words, but also all the subtle nuances of each language. And then it can even translate between them really accurately.
That opens up so many possibilities, from being able to talk to people from all over the world to breaking down language barriers in education and research.
Absolutely. It has the potential to revolutionize so many things, like international diplomacy, business, even just how we understand each other across cultures. Imagine a world where language isn't this huge obstacle to working together and coming up with new ideas.
That's a pretty powerful vision. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something I find both fascinating and a little bit intimidating. It's this whole idea of prompt engineering. It seems like figuring out how to write the right prompt is practically an art form in itself.
You know, it really is becoming a crucial skill when you're working with LLMs. It's all about learning how to communicate what you want to the model so that it gives you the kind of response you're looking for.
So it's like you have to learn how to speak the LLM's language, how to ask your questions and give instructions in a way that gets the best results.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just being clear and specific. There are all these subtle techniques you can use, like adding keywords, giving examples, or even setting up a whole role-playing scenario. It can really change how the LLM responds.
I've seen some incredible examples where people have used these creative prompts to make LLMs generate everything from poetry and code to whole fictional stories, even music. It's almost like having this magic wand that can create anything you can imagine if you just know the right words to say.
It's pretty amazing. And the whole field of prompt engineering is still evolving so rapidly. People are constantly discovering new techniques and figuring out the best ways to communicate with these models. It's become this crucial area of research and development as we try to figure out how to best work with these incredibly powerful language tools.
This is all super exciting, but I can't help but wonder about the limitations too. We talked earlier about interpretability, that idea of being able to understand how the LLM is actually reasoning and making its decisions. Are we making any progress there?
Interpretability is definitely a big challenge, but researchers are making some good progress. One approach is to develop ways to visualize or trace the LLM's decision-making process.
So it's kind of like mapping out the neural pathways of the LLM's artificial brain.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And being able to see it visually like that could help us understand how it arrives at its conclusions, identify any potential biases, and even figure out ways to make the model work even better.
That sounds really promising. But are there other ways to approach interpretability? Like, can we actually make LLMs explain their reasoning in a way that we humans can understand?
That's another area where there's a lot of active research. Some researchers are trying to find ways to get LLMs to actually generate natural language explanations for their decisions.
Mhm.
Like you could ask the LLM, why did you choose this answer? And it could actually give you a clear, understandable explanation.
That would be incredible. Not only would it make us trust them more, but we could also learn from the way they think. It could lead to whole new insights and discoveries.
Exactly. And as we keep pushing the boundaries of what LLMs can do, it's so important that we don't lose sight of interpretability. We don't want these powerful models to be black boxes. We want to understand them, trust them, and be able to work with them effectively.
It's like we're building a bridge between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and interpretability is that key that makes sure the bridge is strong and reliable.
I love that. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, from the practical things like efficiency and multilingual capabilities to the more mind-bending stuff like prompt engineering and this whole quest for interpretability.
It's clear that the world of LLMs is changing so fast, and there are exciting new developments happening all the time.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get even more into how all of these advancements are actually playing out in the real world. How are they changing different industries? What does it mean for the future of how we live, work, and interact with the world around us?
I'm excited to hear more. It's clear that LLMs are already having a huge impact, but it feels like we're just at the beginning of this journey.
I agree. The potential is enormous, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible.
All right, everyone, make sure to stick around for part 2, where we'll uncover even more fascinating insights into the world of LLMs. This is a deep dive you won't want to miss.
Welcome back to our deep dive into large language models. So last time, we really dug into the foundations, like how these LLMs actually process language, those really smart techniques that we use to train them, and even how they manage to focus on the most important information, just like we do as humans.
Yeah, it's really amazing how much progress has been made in such a short time. It seems like LLMs can already write all sorts of creative content, answer these really complex questions, even translate languages with pretty incredible accuracy. But where do we go from here? What's next?
Well, one of the really exciting areas is how we can make LLMs even more efficient. Remember, we talked about computational resources last time, and how training these huge models can be a real energy hog.
Right, like trying to power a small city just to get the LLM to write a haiku.
Exactly. So researchers are really exploring techniques like model distillation, where you essentially take a really large, complex model and you kind of shrink it down, create a smaller, more efficient version that still retains most of that original knowledge.
So it's like creating a student model that learns from the teacher model, becoming almost as knowledgeable but using way less energy.
That's a great way to put it. And there are different ways to do this distillation thing. Like you can have the student model try to match the teacher's output. Or you can even distill specific knowledge, like the ability to perform a certain task really well.
That sounds incredibly practical. I mean,
Mm.
imagine if you could run these really powerful LLMs on everyday devices like our phones or laptops without them overheating or draining the battery in like 5 seconds.
That's the ultimate goal. And it's not even just about efficiency. Smaller models are also easier to deploy and update, which could make it even faster for LLMs to be used in all sorts of different industries.
Makes sense. But let's get back to another challenge we talked about, dealing with words that the LLM has never seen before. How do they cope with the fact that language is constantly changing?
LLMs have actually become quite good at handling those out-of-vocabulary words, and it's all thanks to these really clever tokenization strategies. Remember how we talked about breaking down words into smaller units?
Right, those subword units. So they can use those to make sense of unfamiliar words by recognizing parts they do know.
Exactly. It's like deciphering a new word based on its root or prefix. Let's say the model comes across the word biodegradable. Even if it hasn't seen that exact word before, it can break it down into bio, degrad, and able, which are way more likely to be familiar from all that training data it's been fed.
So it's like a linguistic detective figuring out the meaning from the clues it already knows.
Yeah, that's a great way to visualize it. And being able to handle those new words is absolutely crucial for LLMs to keep up with how language is constantly evolving. especially in fields like science and technology where there are always new terms popping up.
Speaking of evolving, we briefly mentioned multilingual capabilities earlier. It really does feel like LLMs are becoming more and more fluent in a bunch of different languages. How is that happening?
Well, one of the key things is that we're now using these massive multilingual data sets for training. Models like GPT-4, for instance, have been trained on just a huge amount of text from all sorts of different languages.
So it's kind of like immersing the LLM in this global language exchange program.
That's a fun way to think about it. And this multilingual training allows the LLM to really understand the nuances of different languages and even translate between them with pretty impressive accuracy.
That opens up a whole world of possibilities. I mean, from seamless communication across different countries to breaking down language barriers and things like education and research. It's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. It could totally revolutionize fields like diplomacy, global commerce, even just how we understand each other across cultures. Imagine a world where language isn't a barrier to collaboration or innovation.
It's a pretty powerful vision. But let's switch gears a bit and talk about another aspect of LLMs that I find both fascinating and a little bit unsettling. It's this whole idea of prompt engineering. It seems like getting the prompt right is almost like an art form in itself.
It's true. Prompt engineering is definitely becoming a critical skill for working effectively with these LLMs. It's all about understanding how to communicate what you want from the model in a way that gets you the desired response.
So it's like learning how to speak the LLM's language, how to phrase your questions and instructions to get the best results.
Exactly. And it's more than just being clear and specific. There are all these subtle techniques you can use, like incorporating keywords strategically, providing examples, or even setting up a role-playing scenario. It can really change how the LLM responds.
I've seen some really amazing examples where people have used these creative prompts to get LLMs to generate all sorts of things, from poetry and code to whole fictional stories, even music. It's almost like having this magic wand that can create anything you can imagine if you just know the right words to say.
It really is remarkable. And the whole field of prompt engineering is just constantly evolving, with new techniques and best practices popping up all the time. It's become this essential area of research and development as we figure out the best ways to communicate and collaborate with these powerful language models.
It's incredibly exciting, but I also want to touch on the limitations again. We talked about interpretability earlier, the idea of being able to understand the reasoning behind the LLM's decisions. Are we making any progress in that area?
Interpretability is definitely still a challenge, but researchers are working hard and they are making progress. One approach is to develop techniques that allow us to visualize or trace the LLM's decision-making process.
So it's kind of like mapping out the neural pathways of the LLM's artificial brain, right?
I like that analogy. Being able to visualize it like that could really help us understand how the LLM is arriving at its conclusions, whether there are any potential biases, and even lead to ways to make the model even better.
That's promising. But are there any other approaches to interpretability? Like, can we make these LLMs explain their reasoning in a way that we humans can understand?
Yeah, that's another area with a lot of ongoing research. Some researchers are trying to develop methods that would allow LLMs to actually generate explanations for their decisions in natural language. It's like you could ask the LLM, why did you choose this answer? And it could give you a clear, understandable response.
Now, that would be a game changer, wouldn't it? Not only would it increase trust in LLMs, but we could actually learn from their reasoning. It could lead to some really interesting new insights and discoveries.
Exactly. And as we continue to push the boundaries of what these LLMs are capable of, it's crucial that we don't forget about interpretability. We don't want these incredibly powerful models to be black boxes. We want to be able to understand how they work, to trust them, and to work with them effectively.
It's almost like we're building a bridge between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and interpretability is that key that ensures the bridge is strong and safe to cross.
Well put. We've really covered a lot in this part of our deep dive, from the practical stuff like efficiency and multilingual capabilities to the more complex stuff like prompt engineering and that ongoing quest for interpretability.
It's clear that the world of LLMs is changing so fast, and there are so many exciting new developments happening all the time.
And in the final part of our deep dives, we'll explore how these advancements are actually playing out in the real world, transforming industries and shaping the future of how we live, work, and interact with everything around us.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. This is the final part of our exploration of large language models, or LLMs. I feel like we've covered so much already, the inner workings of these AI systems, how they learn and process information, the challenges they face, like efficiency and interpretability, and the incredible progress researchers are making in addressing those challenges.
Yeah, it's been a pretty amazing journey so far, right? And now we're ready to shift gears a bit and really dive into the impact that LLMs are having in the real world. How are all these advancements we've been talking about actually changing the way we live, work, and interact with the world around us?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've talked about all this cool technology, but how is it actually being used? Give us the concrete examples, the real-world applications.
Okay, well, one area where LLMs are already making a huge splash is in the way we find information. Think about it. We're moving beyond those basic keyword searches and into a much more nuanced conversational approach. Remember we touched on ROGA, retrieval augmented generation, earlier?
Right, that's where the LLM can tap into this massive database of information and use it to answer your questions in a really comprehensive way, right?
You got it. Imagine you're researching a complex topic, like, let's say, the history of artificial intelligence. Instead of just getting this laundry list of websites, RGG lets the LLM pull together information from all sorts of sources and then present it to you in a clear, concise way, almost like having your own personalized research assistant.
That would save so much time and effort. And it's not just about finding information, right? LLMs are also being used to create new content, from writing articles and stories to generating marketing copy, even composing music.
Absolutely. The creative potential is mind-blowing. I mean, think about it. In the past, we might have used a thesaurus to find a synonym for a word. Now we have these LLMs that can help us craft entire paragraphs, even whole chapters. And the text they generate isn't just grammatically correct, it's engaging, stylistically interesting.
It's like having a co-writer who can bounce ideas off of you, suggest different angles, even help you get unstuck when you have writer's block.
I love that analogy. And that collaborative potential extends to all sorts of creative fields. I mean, think about a musician using an LLM to help compose a new melody, or a filmmaker using it to brainstorm ideas for a screenplay. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
It all sounds amazing, but I have to ask, what about the elephant in the room? All those concerns about LLMs replacing human jobs. Are we all going to be out of work soon?
It's definitely a valid concern and one we need to approach with a lot of thought and nuance. I don't think it's about LLMs taking over completely. It's more about them augmenting our capabilities, freeing us up to focus on those tasks that really require human intelligence. Things like critical thinking, emotional intelligence, that unique spark of creativity that humans have.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between the strengths of humans and AI, right? Using both to achieve even better outcomes.
Exactly. It's like a partnership.
Yeah.
Let the LLMs handle those repetitive, data-heavy tasks and let humans focus on the big picture, the things that really matter.
It's like having a super-powered assistant who can do all the grunt work, leaving you free to strategize and focus on the things you're really good at.
Exactly. And we're already seeing this shift happening in lots of industries. Take healthcare, for example. LLMs are being used to analyze medical images, help with diagnosis, even personalized treatment plans for individual patients.
So it's not just about speed and efficiency. It's also about improving accuracy, personalization, getting better outcomes for patients.
Absolutely. And then there's education. Imagine LLMs creating these personalized learning experiences, tailoring the content and the pacing to each student's individual needs. It's like every student having their own virtual tutor who adapts to their learning style and helps them reach their full potential.
That would be a game changer for so many students. It's like having a teacher who can really focus on your strengths and weaknesses and give you that customized support.
It's a really powerful idea, and LLMs are making it more and more of a reality. But like with any powerful technology, there are potential downsides too.
Mm.
We've talked a lot about the importance of interpretability, making sure we understand how these models are making their decisions.
Right. We don't want to just blindly trust these systems, especially when it comes to important areas like healthcare or finance.
Definitely not. And then there's the issue of bias. Remember, LLMs are trained on these massive data sets of text and code, and those data sets can reflect all sorts of biases that exist in society.
So if the data is biased, the LLM could end up perpetuating those biases in its outputs.
Unfortunately, yes. That's why it's so important to address this head-on. Researchers are working on techniques to detect and mitigate bias, but it's a constant challenge that requires real collaboration between developers, ethicists, policymakers, everyone.
It's like we're building a new kind of intelligence,
Yeah.
right? And we have a responsibility to make sure that it's not just powerful, but also fair, ethical, aligned with human values.
I couldn't have said it better myself. We have to shape the future of LLMs in a way that benefits all of humanity.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the main takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that LLMs aren't just some technological advancement. They're a fundamental shift in how we interact with information, with technology, even with each other.
It's like we're entering this new era of collaboration between humans and machines where the lines are getting blurrier all the time.
And as we navigate this new world, we have to approach it with both excitement and caution. We need to be aware of the incredible potential while also staying mindful of the challenges.
We need to be thoughtful, informed, and engaged in shaping the future of this technology to make sure it's used for good and ultimately benefits all of us.
Couldn't agree more. And I hope this deep dive has given our listeners the knowledge and understanding they need to do just that.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing journey into the world of large language models. It's been fascinating to explore with all of you, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for this truly transformative technology.
To all our listeners, until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep learning.